with.
Wow. So with regard to the again, spoiler alert if we tell, then I think that's important to talk about the story. There's a couple scenes, one scene in particular, which again, as a parent, I can't. You can't. I don't think until you're, I think you spoke about there's a club that nobody wants to be a member of or something.
I don't. I certainly don't.
And she was a member of that club. So, but in all this, as I was reading the book, and as I'm like I said, I'm trying to remind myself, don't cry, don't cry. She if she can go through that and still put a smile on her face, then the least I can do is honor that. But there's a scene, and even I'm laughing now, and I'm thinking there's a scene where she's in the church with two of your siblings, and it's a priest, and there's a scene going on there. Can you just again, if it's a spoiler alert, so be it. But what happened there? I'm
So
sorry, but
it wasn't, it actually wasn't in the church because there was about
okay.
5,000 people showed up. So they had to move the burial. So they're like they buried him on Sunday, but because it was a Catholic thing, they couldn't have a Catholic massive burial on Sunday. They had to have that on Monday, but 3 day thing. So there was a whole lot of rules that you had to, follow. So on the day of the funeral, the bishop and like I don't know how many priests or whatever showed up. So they were having mass and they had it in this big meadow where there was a rock at the top of the hill and they used that for the altar and they brought all the coffins out of the church and everybody marched there. It was like it wasn't that far, but you had to pass the house where the house was in order to get there, and then you had to pass it going back. And I guess it's kind of like in her out of body experience. Not that it was out of body. I'm not using the right words there because it was just like her shock and awe at it all. She couldn't gather the fact that five of her children were in the ground. So she had to concentrate on something that was just as bad. Like if this wasn't going on, it would be just as bad. So one of my brothers has epilepsy and she was afraid that he was going to have a seizure and like fall into the grave. That was her thing. And one of my other brothers, she was afraid he was going to go and beat the face off the bishop, like that was going to help. So she was worried about that instead of like she said we said prayers and everything, but instead of all that, this was what was worrying her because it was like that was so bad that she couldn't think about that, but she had to have something that was bad to kind of keep her mind occupied. So I think that's where that came from.
I think neither one of us are therapists and or doctors or psychologists,
No.
but I think somewhere in her mind, if I could offer a little thing as a parent, I think that was her motherly instinct was still kicking in. I've lost five, but my sixth one is in the hospital, so I got four. But the motherly instinct was still kicking in, even trying to, whether we call she did process or she wasn't processing or whatever her mind was doing to her, that she still had to look out to those other two, those other four, and she had to watch those.
Yeah, and besides that, like she had not seen me. So she had thought when like they kept her in Placentia at the hospital in Placentia that night because she had a big cut on her arm. So they could,
Oh my.
sewed that up and they kept her kind of in a room to herself. And the priest came and, there was just a lot of stuff going on. So she never got out till the next day. And when she came out, she was like, well, where's Ida? Because she didn't realize. I mean, I'd gone to the hospital with her. Nobody had told her that I was in the hospital. So she didn't learn that till the next day. And then she didn't know how bad I was until she came in a lot, like after the fire. And it was then that she thought, after the funeral, I should say, it was then that she thought she was going to lose the sixth. So, like at that, on them days, I wasn't in the picture. So, she wasn't thinking about me. Not that she
Wow.
wasn't thinking about me,
Oh,
but you know what I
her
mean.
mind, well, like I said, let's call it like we saw it. But I didn't see it, but like you experienced it, she just lost five children.
Yeah.
Now,
And like
for those of us,
your mind can
yes,
only
exactly,
process so much at a time. And that's what the book is about. It's like the taking the time to process that.
exactly. Uh, as you know, whenever I'm with you at signings or whenever I talk about the book, my two favorite words or two favorite lines, and I want you to elaborate on where they come from. One is, and I'm right behind me. You can't see my head. My head is blocking it. I'm blessed. Sometimes I think a little bit on the curse side. There's a clock behind me on the wall, and when I'm in my quiet time doing my meditation, what have you, that clock starts to tick. And so there's I don't know if it's a full chapter or it's one line. I gained a bit of watch as I read the book, and I think it's stuck with me. The ticking of the clock, and then the good feed of salt fish or fresh fish or codfish, depends on what area you're from. Good feed of fish. Where did those two come from?
So I'll start with the fish. So my grandmother used to have migraines, and when she'd get a migraine, she'd be sick for a couple of days, and she used to always say, "If I only had a bit of salt herring or salt fish or something, I think I'd be better." So the day of the funeral, which was the Sunday, her cousin had asked her if she could get her anything, and so she like went to saltfish. She said, "I think if I had a bit of saltfish, I'd be all right." And so my cousin made her the saltfish, and she like they went there, and then they got the church ready to do the funeral. And while she was gone, I guess that was kind of like the way of getting her out of the church. And when she left that house, she was like, "Saltfish doesn't cure everything." So that was kind of where that came from.
Ticking of the
And for
clock.
the ticking of the clock, that was it was my metaphor more than anything, because it talks about processing, and there was only so much she could allow in, and in certain periods of times, like there were chunks, and I likened it to like the ticking of the clock. So when the clock moved ahead, you were able to get put that whatever that sentiment was in your head, and then that allowed room for you to tick once more to get more in. So it was just my interpretation of how she would have let it in more than anything.
Very powerful because to this day, like I said, whenever I hear the ticking of a clock, and I'm blessed and I'm not in a negative way, but cursed, I think, because sometimes she's not even on my mind, and I hear the clock tick, and I'm going, wow, like how do you process? How do you, and we can make it as simple or as complicated. How do you process losing five children? And how do you process possibly losing a sixth? How do you go through that process? Because it's a process. I mean, they say there's seven stages of grieving and all that stuff. That's usually referencing one person. Okay, let's try five children and the loss of a house, the loss of your livelihood, what you knew as your life, your home, your children, like your identity as a parent has been challenged because I'm a mother of 10 children. No, you're not. You're the mother of five, and possibly not even that. Because so, how do you process that? So, the ticking of the clock, I think, is a powerful metaphor.
And I think within a couple of months of that, like she went from having 10 children, like Eddie went away, Neil went to school, and Larry went away to school, and I was in St. John's in the hospital, or like back and forth to a school in there. So like her and dad were left alone to build a house, and they just had ten children. Like
Wow,
one day you had 10 children, the next day really she had none, because like I said, we were all gone.
wow. So, I mean, there's this thing called the empty nest syndrome, and talk about,
Yeah, she got a nest that was a big comeuppance at that time.
wow. In the book, you talk about, and forgive me because this is where my clause as a protective person comes into play. So if I sound a bit terse, it's because I'm reflecting back on this, and I still cannot believe it. But I read that, not heard, and I read with my own eyes. There was an inquiry and a hearing.
Yes, so I can't say for sure that it would have happened anyway, but there was rumors that like the fire had been started because of cooking or something like that. So I think that's what triggered the inquiry. That somebody might have done it, like whatever that would have helped to know that. I don't know, but anyway, because they say because there was multiple deaths, there had to be an inquiry. I can't confirm or deny that it was 1980, so I don't know. But anyway, there was an inquiry. It was like 2 years, I believe, after the fire. So everything was still raw and emotional for her. And, being brought before the court was a big deal. Then, for anybody at that time, it would have been a big deal to be in court and accused and stuff like that. So she really had her defenses up because of that, and she wasn't sure what they were going to say they found and things like that. And I don't know what would have happened if they had to say something that would have hurt even more rather than that they didn't find the cause.
After 2 years of hopefully building or trying to rebuild or trying to
Just
pull
getting
everything
your
together.
surface on, your feet beneath you, and then they had that. It was just like they took the legs right out from under her again.
And what was, do you know? I mean, I can't remember the book, but I'm sure it's fresh with you. What were the results of the inquiry?
They just said they couldn't determine what happened. They couldn't determine a cause. There was nothing on the stove. There was nothing from a cooking event that would have happened. And so I think that was kind of a relief for her too.
Mhm.
But they didn't find the cause. They said a lot of maybes, but there was nothing for sure.
Wow, like talk about pick somebody when they're trying to come back. Talk about
Yeah.
wow. Okay. Well, yeah, like I said, I tend to get a little. It's not my life, but it's a story that I've read, and it's like wow.